Welcome everyone. Myself Dr. Praveen Kumar Pathak, Associate Professor in the Department of Geography at Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi with my colleague Manisha Sharma. Today we are going to discuss one very important issue that is related with localization of Sustainable Development Goal in Indian perspective. Dear friends, we know that Sustainable Development Goals represent one of the most important global agenda of progress and prosperity at the time of uncertainty that is growing in this world. If you look at Agenda 2030 of the Sustainable Development Goal, which was adopted by all United Nations member states in the year 2050, it provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity of people and the planet now and also in the future. If you look at these Sustainable Development Goals, which are various themes related with cutting across issues, for instance, on the one hand the focus is to eradicate the burden of poverty, hunger, disease, poor health. On the other hand, these goals focus upon ensuring balanced social, economic and environmental sustainability. So therefore, addressing sustainability requires critical action on these three important pillars of economic, social and environmental sustainability. One important issue that we must recognize is that there is a great deal of synergies between these Sustainable Development Goals. Let's take for example the case of climate action, SDG 13. Now if you are working on SDG 13 to address the issues of climate change, we recognize that there is a very strong, robust synergies that exist between SDG 13 on climate actions with SDG 3, that is human health. And let's take for example, as we are all observing with increasing extreme weather events, climate change, heat waves, etc. increasing, it's going to have tremendous impact on human health in different part of the world. And more recently, if you see the case of Asian context, the frequent episodes of heat waves, floods, drought, etc. has brought about tremendous impact on the livelihood condition and health outcomes of people living in the South Asian country. And similar situation also prevails in other sections of the global South, including in Africa, in East Asia, and even more recently last year in the case of Europe, we have also observed that to what extent increasing episodes of heat waves have brought about tremendous health burden. So therefore, if we do some critical action in order to address climate change issues, it will certainly bring formidable difference in the life and livelihood of people. Similarly, climate actions are also related with clean energy. So as extreme weather events are occurring, the demand for resources, particularly energy, is rising day by day. So as soon as we enter into the summer seasons, there is a huge skyrocketing demand for energy resources for household consumption, for industrial consumption, and likewise. So these are directly related. If you work on ameliorating climate change with decisive action, it will help us to check the rising demand for energy resources. Similarly, if you look at SDG 11, which is cities and communities, and that again is very much reflected and correlated with climate actions. So we know that with extreme floods or temperature or heat waves, cities have become a very important issue of concern for global community. Now most of the cities in the global South are basically inhabited by population which comes from economically and socially deprived section of society. Roughly 40 to 50% of the total population in the cities of global South tends to live in slum areas. So with the increasing intensity and frequencies of extreme climate events, including heat waves and floods over the period of time, they bring tremendous risk for the health and well-being of people who are living in urban cities, particularly those who are living in slums and squatter settlements. And likewise, if you look at the issues of SDG 12, which is related with responsible consumption and production systems, so that is also very much related with SDG 13, which is as extreme events are increasing, temperature is rising, the groundwater table is coming down, the rainfall pattern have become erratic, which means that majority of agricultural production and agriculture related livelihood have been threatened to a great extent, which means that the prospects of production, particularly from the primary sector, has been threatened to a great extent. And so therefore, these all examples help us to realize that if you work to address any one of the SDG, in this case if you are working on climate actions, so there are likely to be horizontal repercussions in other related SDGs as well. So therefore, at the policy level, it is very important for us to recognize that these important global actions should not only be implemented in silos or in compartments, rather recognizing their synergies is very critical in order to bring about informed and decisive action to address these common global challenges for the benefit of all the people, all the planet, and for humanity as a whole. Now, if you look at the 17 SDG goals, the major crux or the heart of the agenda is call for action by all the countries, including the developed nations and the developing nations. So SDG is nothing about a global commitment, a global partnership, a decisive political action if we have to bring in change in the life of global citizens. And so therefore, if you look at SDGs, we focus on reducing the burden, bringing out people from the clutches of poverty. Millions of people, say in the last 10 to 12 years, have come out from the burden of poverty in India itself. So on the one hand, we have to find out alternative ways, alternative livelihood opportunities, so that people may come out from the clutches of poverty and deprivation. And this go very much hand in hand with alternative strategies that focus on improving the health, education, reducing inequalities, and spurring the wave of economic growth. So all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So this is very, very interesting and important, that if you are working just on a single pillar or maybe two pillars, whether it is economy or society, that is not sufficient. For any nation or any country to enter into a future of sustainable progress, peace and prosperity, it is highly critical that we must focus and have a strategy wherein all these three pillars are put into action simultaneously. So therefore, it's very important that we focus on understanding and encouraging creativity, technological know-how, and financial resources from all of society, which is a must if we have to achieve SDGs in every context. And if you compare SDGs from previous predecessors, one of the biggest difference lies in the fact that any development approach cannot really bear its fruit until and unless all the stakeholders of the nation, of the society, of academia, of common public do not come together on board. So that is something unique about SDGs. And if you compare with this predecessor, which I am going to do in a few seconds, we will find that this was lacking in the previous agendas of action. And so therefore, the earlier predecessors of SDGs like MDGs or the Rio Action, etc., they were not able to deliver the results. The problem was they were not able to recognize the synergies of action between these very important yet interrelated goals. And also it is critical for us to understand that the global society and the governments needs to work together in a partnership if we have to deliver the results in such a manner that it really brings out difference on the ground and life of the people. So, before entering into the global sustainability, issues and coming to the local sustainability issues, just to quickly go through the, evolution of the idea of sustainable progress. So it goes back to 1940s and 50s eras, after the Second World War, when the post Second World War era was era of reformation, era where economic growth, production, technological know-how was rebuilding, reconstructing in Europe and elsewhere. And followed up was, there was tremendous application of modern high yielding variety of seeds, etc., in order to increase agriculture output to secure food for people across the world. So the net result was, on the one hand, with mindless exploitation of the agricultural fields, with application of manures, fertilizers, and all those chemicals, what happened was gradually the health of the soil started deteriorating. And similarly, with increasing global population and extraction of natural resources, there was massive exploitation of natural resources, and the face of the earth was very much changed. There was a massive exploitation of land use and land cover. So all this led to a situation where there was tremendous reaction from environmentalists from different parts of the world, and among them one of the major and very important writings came from Rachel Carson called Silent Spring, where she brought out the struggles that was observed due to mindless application of fertilizers, manures, etc. in the United States. And followed up with, there was another important publication that was brought out by Paul Ehrlich in the form of Population Bomb, where he tried to basically echo the sentiments of to what extent the global population rise is going to threaten the survival of the people and the planet, and which was followed up with the next year's publication by the Club of Rome, Meadows, who brought out this important writing called The Limits to Growth. So this was the background under which there was a realization that there was increasing gap between global population rise and the availability of the natural resources. And thus, in this context, there was the first international conference that took place in Stockholm, which for the first time brought about the issue of environment, which is very central to the discussion on debate and development. And that for the first time the global community realized that development at the cost of environment cannot be sustainable. And this was followed up with several other important publications, leading way to our Common Future report, which was published in the year 1987, also known as the Brundtland Commission, that gave this formal idea that sustainability is about ensuring both intragenerational equity and intergenerational equity. So what does it mean? It means that within a given generation, there has to be equity in access to opportunity and resources. At the same time, there has to be intergenerational, from one generation to the other generation. We must have enough strategies and action on the ground so as we ensure that not only do we meet the need of the current generation, but also how can we ensure the need for the future generation to be met as well. And with this idea into mind, we had this important international conference of 92, the Rio conference, and there was important discussion and agenda of action which was adopted. But that was not really giving results on the ground, partly because the issues of global partnership, funding, and there was a contradiction, inherent contradiction into the idea of sustainability. What is this contribution about? So the contradiction about. So the contradiction was that most of the Western nations, which were materially very advanced, technologically very advanced, they were actually situated at a very different plane altogether, as compared to majority of the developing nations who were yet to experience development, who were yet to feed their population, who were yet to light the villages and the cities in their nations. So the basic issues of most of these developing nations were completely different. And development in the global south can only come with exploitation of natural resources. And hence, given these dichotomy, given these contradictions in the priorities, it was decided that we have to have common yet differentiated responsibility as a global community if we have to address the issues of sustainability. And this led to the emergence of the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, when again most of the developing nations came together to fight 8 common challenges, again related to eradicating the burden of poverty, disease, health, gender, environment, HIV/AIDS, and global partnership. And there was credible progress made on a few of these important goals. But overall, if we evaluate, and the reports are available in the public domain, barring noticeable progress on poverty and health, on other major goals, the progress was not very satisfactory. And when these MDG era was passing on into the SDG goals, it was recognized that the global challenges need a global response. And so the dichotomy and the contrasting priorities needs to be reconciled, and global community must come together to address these sustainable development issues and challenges. So this is how, this is the background under which we are right now. 7 years have already passed, and halfway we are into the SDG era. In the next 7 years, they are very highly critical for different countries. And even we know that COVID pandemic did not help the progress. In fact, it has undone whatever progress which has been made, particularly in the context of Global South. Now, this is a recent data from the United Nations 2023 report, which looks at the 17 SDG goals. If you look at these graphs carefully, you will observe that there has been some progress. The green and the yellow bar shows that there has been some progress, but red and the grey bar clearly shows that there is lot more progress needs to be done if we want to rescue the people and the planet in the years to come. But how can we really make progress until and unless we don't know where we stand? So if you look at these 17 goals, which are encapsulated into 169 targets, then if you look at what kind of situation exists today, so for majority of these goals, what we observe is that there is a scarcity of reliable statistics and data. And so if for 40% of different goals only we have some kind of data, for 60% of goals we don't have much data across different parts of the world. And so this brings into the picture the issue of robust data ecosystem in place. If the robust data ecosystem is not in place, it is very difficult to take decisive action on the ground, which can really bring change in the life of common people. And with this idea in mind, we would like to see what India has been doing over the last 7 to 8 years in terms of implementing these global sustainable development goals at subnational level or at local level. Now, if you look at India's major strategy, so that India is a very large country in terms of its geographical area and also in terms of the population size. So every sixth person in this world is an Indian. And so therefore, progress of India or the journey of India is very critical for global journey to achieve sustainable development goal agenda. And thus, if you look at India's strategy, our strategy has been a very much paradigm shift towards whole of a society approach, which the government of India is actually engaging different national and subnational government and local government, civil society organization, local communities, people who are living in vulnerable situation, and also the private sector. So this is putting all these different stakeholders into the journey of sustainability. It is what is known as whole of a society approach, or as popularly known by our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, what we call as Jan Bhagidari, making development a mass movement approach, whole society approach. So the idea is that in the colonial past, even after independence, for the last 60 years or 50 years, or even in some places today, there has been a colonial mindset in terms of delivery of development goods and services, which means that the vertical approach of administration has been largely used. And so therefore this approach needs to be changed, and we will see what India has been doing over the last few years, which has brought about some important difference.